A 7-year-old girl, the daughter of the new maid, formed a deep bond with the millionaire businessman who treated her like his own child. He was about to marry a seemingly perfect woman, but the girl began noticing strange behavior from the fiancé whenever he wasn't home. The businessman also started showing worrying symptoms after their dinners. In desperation, the girl confronted the fiancé in the dining room, shouting, "If you do this to him, I'll stop you." At that moment, the businessman arrived home and overheard the entire conversation by the door. What he heard in the fiancé's reply changed everything forever. Clara's small feet made barely a sound on the polished marble floors, which reflected the crystal chandeliers like an inverted, starry sky. At 7, she had learned the art of being invisible, a little shadow moving through the corners of the vast mansion, watching the world of adults with eyes that saw far more than they imagined. 2 months ago, her mother, Sophia, had become the new housekeeper in this palace, and to Clara, the owner of the house, Mr. Arthur, was more than just a boss. He was the son, a man whose immense fortune, built on bold Wall Street investments and shrewd business ventures, had not hardened his heart. He treated her with a kindness she had never known, reading her stories in his massive library and always giving her a secret wink when he passed, as if they shared a unique bond. He saw her not as the housekeeper's daughter, but as the little light that brightened the silent hallways of his home. Everything was almost perfect, if not for Isabella, Arthur's fiancée. To the world, and especially to Arthur, Isabella was the personification of grace and sweetness. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves, her dresses were always elegant, and her voice was like honey. When Arthur was near, she would hug Clara, calling her "my little princess." But the moment Arthur's eyes turned away, the sweetness evaporated, replaced by a cold glint that lasted only a second, but sent a shiver down Clara's spine. It was a secret the girl held deep in her chest, a small, nagging fear she didn't know how to name. No one would believe her. After all, how could a woman so beautiful be anything but good? That afternoon, the setting sun painted the dining room in shades of orange and gold. Arthur had come home from the office tired, talking about the cash flow of one of his companies and the need to diversify his portfolio with new assets. Isabella, as always, was there to soothe him. "My love, you work too hard," she said, her hand gliding softly down his arm. "Let me make you your special tea, the one that helps you unwind." Arthur smiled, grateful. Clara, sitting in a corner near the kitchen, watched. She had seen Isabella prepare that tea dozens of times, but something about the meticulousness of the ritual made her uneasy. Isabella allowed no one, not even the cook, to touch the ingredients. It was always the same dried leaves from an unlabeled ceramic jar she kept locked in a personal cabinet. As the water boiled, Isabella turned, thinking she was alone. Her movements were quick and precise. She opened the jar, took a small pinch of leaves, and placed them in the teapot. But then, with a swift glance toward the dining room door, she retrieved a second vial, tiny and dark, hidden in the back of the cabinet. With trembling fingers, she uncapped the vial and let a single drop of a colorless, oily liquid fall into the steaming teapot before hiding it again. Her face, for an instant, lost all its softness, transforming into a mask of cold determination. As she carried the tray into the room, her sweet smile was back in place. "Here you are. Darling," she said, handing the cup to Arthur. He took it, inhaling the familiar aroma. "You're an angel, Isabella." Before he drank, his eyes met Clara's in the corner. He gave her their conspiratorial wink, but when Clara looked at Isabella, the smiling angel was gone. In her place was a woman whose eyes stared at her with a chilling intensity, a silent, terrifying warning that said, "You saw nothing." Clara's heart pounded, a frantic drum against her small ribs. Isabella's gaze had nailed her to the floor, turning her feet to lead. She watched, helpless, as Arthur drank the entire cup, the warm liquid going down his throat, carrying the colorless, sinister drop with it. He sighed, a sound of relief, and leaned his head back in the armchair. "I'm feeling a little dizzy all of a sudden," he murmured, closing his eyes. Must be the exhaustion. It was a long day. Discussing the profitability of some investment funds, Isabella rushed to his side, concern etched on her perfectly sculpted face. "Oh, my darling, you need to rest. Go up to the bedroom. I'll take care of everything." Her voice was pure silk, but to Clara, it sounded like the hiss of a snake. The girl remained huddled in her corner, fear becoming an icy ball in her stomach. She was the only one who knew the truth, the only one who had seen Isabella's angelic mask slip. Later that night, as her mother, Sophia, tucked her into bed in the small room they occupied in the mansion's service wing, Clara tried to find the words. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Miss Isabella, she put something in Mr. Arthur's tea." Sophia, exhausted after a long day of hard work, stroked her hair. "Such an imagination, my love. You must have been daydreaming." "No, Mom. I saw it. From a little dark vial." Frustration brought tears to Clara's eyes. Sophia sighed. "Honey, Miss Isabella adores Mr. Arthur. She would never do anything to hurt him. She's so good to us, giving us this job, this place to live. We can't be ungrateful with these wild stories." The word ungrateful hit Clara like a slap. Her mother didn't understand. No one would. She was alone. The immense wealth of this place, which to her mother meant security, now felt like a gilded cage to Clara. The next day, Clara avoided Isabella at all costs, hiding behind heavy curtains or in the manicured garden. But Isabella found her. She approached silently as Clara watched a squirrel scamper up an ancient oak tree. "What are you thinking about, little princess?" Isabella asked, her voice so sweet it was sickening. Clara flinched but didn't turn. Isabella knelt beside her, the expensive perfume from her clothes enveloping the girl like a suffocating fog. "You know, Clara, Arthur has a lot of money, a fortune people like us can't even imagine. And he's very generous, but he doesn't like lies. Lies can spoil everything." She placed a hand on Clara's shoulder, her fingers squeezing with surprising strength. "Made-up stories can make people very sad. And when Arthur gets sad, he can make bad decisions. He might send the people who tell those stories away." The threat was there, clear as day, wrapped in velvet words. Clara's eyes filled with terrified tears. She looked into Isabella's smiling face and saw only the coldness behind it. Isabella stood up, smoothing her flawless dress. "I saw you admiring the dollhouse in the playroom," she said, her tone shifting abruptly. "It's yours, a gift from me. So you can remember how good things happen when we're good little girls and keep silly secrets to ourselves." She winked, a gesture that was a cruel imitation of Arthur's affectionate one. Clara stood frozen, fear and confusion at war within her. She wanted to scream, to run to Arthur and tell him everything, but Isabella's hand on her shoulder still burned, and her words echoed in her mind. If she spoke, she could lose everything. Not just for herself, but for her mother. Isabella had just handed her the key to her golden cage and, at the same time, shown her the lock. The days that followed dragged on in a haze of fear and silence. The magnificent dollhouse, Isabella's poisoned gift, sat untouched in Clara's room, its miniature doors shut like lips guarding a terrible secret. The girl saw it not as a toy, but as a monument to her own cowardice. Every time she passed it, she felt the squeeze of Isabella's fingers on her shoulder and heard the threatening whisper in her mind. Clara's world shrank, confined to the mansion's corridors, where she moved like a little ghost, her eyes always fixed on Arthur, and what she saw each day sank her heart a little deeper into despair. The sun that was Arthur was dimming, slowly and inexorably. It wasn't something others noticed right away. It was small things, almost invisible cracks in the facade of a powerful, vibrant man. One morning at breakfast, he trailed off mid-sentence while talking about stock market fluctuations, his eyes wandering into the distance for a long moment before he blinked and muttered, "Sorry, I lost my train of thought." On another occasion, climbing the grand staircase, he missed a step and stumbled, catching himself on the banister, his face pale and slick with sweat. Isabella was always there, a pillar of solicitous support. "Careful, my love. You've been working too hard managing this entire estate. You need to delegate more." She would guide him to a chair, bringing him a glass of water and, inevitably, one of her calming infusions. To everyone else, she was the devoted fiancée. To Clara, every gesture of care was a stab. Arthur began to complain of a constant fog in his mind, a difficulty concentrating that frustrated him deeply. "It's like my brain is wrapped in cotton," he told a business partner on the phone, his voice heavy with an exhaustion Clara had never heard before. "Capital keeps moving. The businesses demand attention, but I just can't think clearly." Clara, hiding behind the library door, felt hot tears stream down her face. He was sick, and she knew why. Guilt gnawed at her, a blight that kept her from eating and sleeping. At night, she'd wake from nightmares where she tried to scream a warning to him, but no sound would come out, while Isabella smiled and offered him another cup of tea. The situation reached a crisis point on a rainy afternoon. Arthur, feeling a bit better, had called Clara into his study. He wanted to show her his collection of antique globes, one of his personal treasures. "Look at this one, little one," he said, pointing to an ornate globe. "It shows how people imagined the world a long, long time ago." He smiled, and for a moment he was the old Arthur, the man whose grin could warm the entire house. He stood to get a smaller globe from a high shelf. As he reached up, a sudden wave of vertigo hit him. His eyes widened, the color drained from his face, and he swayed dangerously. The small globe slipped from his trembling fingers and shattered on the hardwood floor with a hollow, final sound. Arthur braced himself against the desk, gasping for breath, confusion and fear plain in his eyes. In that instant, he didn't look like a powerful multimillionaire. He looked fragile and lost. Isabella rushed into the study, drawn by the noise. "Arthur, what happened?" She ran to his side, wrapping her arms around him. "My God, you're as pale as a ghost." She helped him sit down, casting a reproachful glance at the broken pieces on the floor. As she stroked Arthur's forehead with her hand, her eyes lifted and met Clara's, who stood frozen in terror near the door. Over Arthur's slumped shoulder, Isabella's face was a mask of concern for him, but her gaze at the girl was something else entirely. There was no alarm, no fear. There was a cold, calculating glint, a flash of dark satisfaction that lasted less than a second but screamed a terrifying truth. Her plan was working perfectly. The sound of the shattering globe echoed in Clara's mind for hours, a cruel reminder of Arthur's fragility. That flash of triumph in Isabella's eyes had been the spark that lit a new flame inside the girl. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now mixed with something stronger. Anger, a protective fury that made her clench her small fists until her nails dug into her palms. She could no longer stand by and watch the sun of her life fade away. She needed proof. Something her mother or anyone else couldn't dismiss as childish imagination. She needed the dark vial. The opportunity came 2 days later. Isabella announced she would be spending the entire afternoon at a luxury spa, a beauty ritual, before an important dinner with investors that Arthur, in his weakened state, had cancelled. He was in his room, sleeping a heavy, unnatural sleep, induced by another of Isabella's concoctions. The mansion was quiet, save for the distant hum of the vacuum cleaner her mother was using in another wing. It was now or never. With her heart hammering against her ribs, Clara crept into the kitchen. The cabinet where Isabella kept her special ingredients was high, out of her reach. The girl dragged a heavy chair from the dining room, the sound of its wooden legs scraping against the marble sounding like thunder in her ears. Climbing onto the chair, she stood on her tiptoes, her fingers fumbling along the top shelf. She felt past the ceramic jar of tea leaves and deeper in the back. Her fingers brushed against the small, cool glass of the vial. A chill ran through her. With a trembling hand, she grasped it. It was smaller than it looked from a distance, dark and unlabeled, containing a liquid that barely moved. She slipped it into the pocket of her dress and climbed down, pushing the chair back into place with tremendous effort. Now, she had to show it to someone. She ran to find her mother, finding her in the grand hall, polishing a mahogany table. "Mom, look," Clara said, breathless, holding out the vial in her palm. "This is it. This is what Miss Isabella puts in Mr. Arthur's tea." Sophia stopped what she was doing. A dust cloth hanging from her hand, she took the small vial, examining it with a frown. "Where did you get this, Clara?" she asked, her tone more of reprimand than curiosity. "I got it from the kitchen cabinet. It's the poison, Mom. I know it is." Clara's hope began to wither under her mother's expression. Sophia shook her head, a tired sigh escaping her lips. "This could be anything, my child. An essential oil, a remedy for headaches. You can't just take people's things and make these terrible accusations." She tried to open the vial, but it was sealed tight. "Look, Miss Isabella is under a lot of stress with the wedding and taking care of Mr. Arthur. We should be supporting her, not making trouble. Now, let's put this back before she notices it's gone." Clara's frustration exploded. "No, you're not listening to me! He's getting sicker every day! He stumbles, he forgets things! It's because of this!" Tears were streaming freely now. Sophia hugged her, but it was the hug of someone consoling a child having a nightmare, not someone who believed a warning. "I know you care about him, sweetie. We all do, but you're scared, and your imagination is running wild." She took the vial from Clara's hand. "I'll put it back myself, and not another word about this. Do you understand? For our own good." Watching her mother walk away with the proof in her hand, a feeling of crushing defeat washed over Clara. Her own mother, the person she trusted most in the world, didn't believe her. Worse, she was returning the weapon to the enemy's hands. And suddenly, Clara realized a terrifying fact. Isabella didn't have to convince her to be quiet. She only had to convince her mother. The defeat was bitter. Clara watched from hiding as her mother carefully placed the vial back in the cabinet, the gesture sealing her failure. Sophia was acting out of fear, out of a gratitude to Isabella that blinded her to the truth dancing right before her eyes. That evening, Isabella returned from the spa, radiant and refreshed. As she entered the kitchen to prepare Arthur's nightly tea, she paused for a moment, her gaze sweeping the room. Her smile faltered for a microsecond as her eyes fixed on the cabinet, as if a keen intuition warned her that her sanctuary had been violated. She opened the door, her body blocking Clara's view, and stood motionless for a long moment. When she turned around, there was no trace of doubt on her face, only the same calculated serenity as always. But Clara knew, Isabella knew, someone had been through her things. The next day marked the beginning of a new phase in Isabella's silent war. She didn't confront Clara directly. Her tactics were far more subtle and cruel. She began to undermine the girl's credibility in her own mother's eyes. During lunch, in Sophia's presence, Isabella sighed dramatically. "Oh, Sophia, I need to tell you something worrying." Sophia stopped cleaning, her attention fully on her. "Little Clara, she's been telling some strange stories lately. She told me she saw a ghost in the garden yesterday." Clara, who was nearby, froze. It was a bald-faced lie. "That's not true," the girl protested. Isabella just gave Sophia a sad smile. "You see, her imagination is so vivid. I worry she can't tell fantasy from reality. Perhaps she feels lonely in this big house." Sophia, already predisposed to believe her daughter was fanciful, fell into the trap. She has always had a wild imagination, Sophia said, shooting a warning glance at Clara. I'll talk to her, Miss Isabella. I apologize for any trouble. The manipulation continued. Isabella would accidentally knock over an expensive vase when Clara was near, only to tell Sophia later, "Don't worry, it was an accident. But maybe we should keep Clara away from fragile things. She's a bit clumsy." Each lie was a brushstroke on the canvas Isabella was painting of Clara, a troubled, imaginative, and careless child. Sophia, terrified of losing the job that was their only source of income and housing, began to police her daughter more strictly. "Don't bother Miss Isabella. Stay in your room. Stop making up stories." Her mother's words became the bars of her prison. The cruelest blow came a week later. Arthur was feeling particularly unwell, a throbbing headache keeping him in bed. Isabella summoned Sophia to the study. "Sophia," she began, her voice heavy with false sorrow, "I found this in the guest room, where Clara sometimes plays." She held out her hand, revealing one of Arthur's gold watches, a valuable piece he kept on his nightstand. "I know she didn't mean any harm. Children are curious, they pick up shiny things. But Arthur would be devastated if he knew. He values trust so much." Sophia turned pale, horror written on her face. I don't know what to say. I swear, Miss Isabella, she's never done anything like this before." "I know, dear. I know," Isabella said, placing a comforting hand on Sophia's shoulder. "That's why I'm telling you, not him. I don't want a childish prank to cost you your job. But you need to keep your daughter in line, for all our sakes. If something like this happens again, my hands will be tied." The accusation, though false, was devastating. That night, Sophia confronted her daughter, not with anger, but with a desperation that broke Clara's heart. "Why, Clara? Why did you take the watch? Do you know how much we need this job?" "I didn't take it," Clara cried, tears of injustice burning her eyes. "She did. She's lying." But her words were lost in her mother's conviction. "Enough," Sophia said, her voice firm for the first time. "From now on, you stay away from Miss Isabella. You stay away from Mr. Arthur. You will be quiet, or I swear we will end up on the street." The final threat had been delivered, not by Isabella, but by her own mother. Isabella had won. She had not only silenced Clara, but she had turned her mother into her jailer. The forced alliance between Sophia and Isabella turned the mansion into an emotional minefield for Clara. Her mother, now convinced her daughter was a source of trouble, watched her with a hawk's eye. Clara's freedom was curtailed. The hallways she once explored with curiosity were now forbidden territories. She spent most of her time confined to her small room, the unloved dollhouse her only companion. From her window, she watched the world go on. She saw Arthur, more stooped and pale each day, being helped by Isabella on a slow walk through the garden. She saw Isabella's triumphant smile when she thought no one was looking. Each scene was a torture, a reminder of her powerlessness. The truth was trapped in her chest, a desperate bird beating its wings against the cage of her ribs. The isolation and injustice began to weigh on the girl. She became withdrawn and quiet, losing the sparkle in her eyes that Arthur had so admired. Even her mother, in the midst of her fear and stress, noticed the change. "What is it with you, Clara? Why are you always so sad?" Sophia asked one night, while combing her daughter's hair. Clara just shrugged, the words stuck in her throat. How could she explain that the sadness was the weight of knowing the man they both admired was being slowly destroyed, and the person who should be her protector was now an unknowing accomplice? She missed Arthur, the warmth of his attention, his secret winks. He was the only person in this house besides her mother who made her feel seen, and now she was forbidden from going near him. One day, the longing became unbearable. Ignoring her mother's orders, Clara slipped out of her room. She knew Arthur often spent the late afternoon in the library, trying to read his business reports, though the fog in his mind made the task nearly impossible. her heart pounding. She approached the heavy oak door, which was slightly ajar. She saw him sitting in his large leather armchair, his head in his hands. He looked smaller, as if the chair was swallowing him. His shoulders were slumped in defeat. He was no longer the confident giant who ran an empire of stocks and assets. He was just a tired, sick man. The sight of him, so vulnerable, broke the last of Clara's fear. She had to try. One more time. She pushed the door open gently and stepped inside. "Mr. Arthur," she whispered. He lifted his head slowly, his eyes taking a moment to focus. A faint smile touched his lips when he recognized her. "Clara, little one, where have you been? I've missed you." The tenderness in his voice gave her the courage she needed. "I've missed you too," she said, moving closer. "You're not well." "I'm just tired, sweetheart. So very tired," he replied, his voice slurring slightly. "It's the tea," Clara said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "It's Miss Isabella's tea. She puts things in it to make you sick." Arthur stared at her, confusion clouding his features. He opened his mouth to reply, perhaps to gently scold her as her mother had, but before he could, Isabella's icy voice cut through the library's quiet air. "What do you think you're doing in here?" Isabella stood in the doorway, her posture rigid. Fury barely contained in her eyes. She had followed Clara. "I told your mother to keep you away. It seems you don't learn, do you?" She strode toward Clara, each step echoing with menace. Arthur, in his weakened state, could only watch, his confusion turning to alarm. "Isabella, calm down. She's just a child. She's a lying, troubled child," Isabella snapped, her voice rising. She grabbed Clara's arm, hard. "We're going to have a talk, you and I, and your mother." In that moment, something inside Clara broke. The fear, the frustration, the anger, and the desperate love for Arthur converged into a single explosion of defiance. She wrenched her arm from Isabella's grip with surprising force. She looked directly at the woman's furious face, then to Arthur, who watched her with wide eyes, and finally back at Isabella. Her voice, when she spoke, was not that of a frightened little girl, but of a cornered warrior. "No, we're going to talk now, right here." She planted her feet firmly on the Persian rug, her chin held high. "You're not going to hurt him anymore." The gauntlet had been thrown in the heart of Arthur's fortress, before him and his tormentor. The library, once a sanctuary of knowledge, had become a battlefield, and a 7-year-old girl had just fired the first shot. The silence that followed Clara's words was heavy and vibrant, charged with the electricity of a lightning strike about to happen. Arthur, still seated, looked from his furious fiancée to the small, defiant figure of the girl, his clouded mind struggling to process the scene. Isabella was the first to break the silence. A short, humorless laugh escaped her lips. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "Arthur, darling, do you see? This is what I've been trying to tell you. The girl lives in a fantasy world. She needs help." She turned to Clara, the false smile back on her face, but her eyes were hard as glass. "Come along, dear. Your mother is waiting. You don't want to cause any more trouble, do you?" She held out her hand, expecting Clara to take it meekly, but Clara's courage, once lit, would not be so easily extinguished. "No," she repeated, her voice steady. "You're not taking me anywhere. And you're not giving him your special tea anymore." The direct challenge made Isabella's smile vanish instantly. Her expression hardened, the mask of sweetness crumbling to reveal the cruelty beneath. "You are crossing a line, you little brat," she hissed, taking a menacing step forward. It was then that a new player entered the scene. An unexpected ally Clara could not have predicted. The sound of hurried footsteps in the hall culminated in Sophia's arrival. Her face flushed with panic. "Clara, what are you doing? I told you to stay in your room." "1,000 apologies, Miss Isabella, Mr. Arthur." Isabella cut her off, never taking her eyes off Clara. "Your daughter, Sophia, is making some very serious accusations. She's saying that I'm poisoning my fiancée. The word poisoning hung in the air, shocking and irrefutable. Sophia gasped, horror washing over her features. "No! Clara, apologize right now. How could you say such a thing?" She grabbed her daughter's shoulder, trying to pull her away, but Clara stood her ground. "It's true, Mom. I saw it." Desperate, Sophia turned to Arthur. "Mr. Arthur, please forgive her. She doesn't know what she's saying. I'll pack our things. We'll leave. We won't be any more trouble." The fear of losing everything, of being thrown out onto the street, was greater than anything else. Arthur, who had been watching the scene as if through a thick pane of glass, finally moved. The commotion, the forbidden words, Sophia's panic. It all seemed to have pierced through some of the fog in his mind. He raised a hand, a weak gesture, but one that commanded silence. "Wait," he said, his voice hoarse. "Sophia, you're not going anywhere." He focused on Clara, his eyes searching hers. There was something in the girl's intensity, in her refusal to back down, that struck him deeply. He'd seen that same determination in boardrooms, in business adversaries. It wasn't fantasy, it was conviction. "Clara," he said slowly, "what exactly did you see?" The direct question, the first time an adult had taken her seriously, gave Clara a fresh surge of strength. "I saw her," she said, pointing a trembling finger at Isabella. "She has a little dark vial, and every time she makes your tea, she puts a drop from it in the cup. And after you drink it, you get sick." The accusation was plain, simple, and direct. Isabella laughed again, a shrill sound. "Arthur, for God's sake, you're not going to believe this, are you? It's the word of a delusional child against mine." She knelt before him, taking his hand. "My love, I live to take care of you. This hurts me so deeply." Arthur looked at Isabella's hand on his, then at Clara's tear-streaked but resolute face. He was at the center of a storm, his mind spinning. Trust. The word echoed in his head. He had built his multi-million-dollar empire on trust, on his ability to read people. And now, looking into the eyes of his fiancée and the eyes of his housekeeper's daughter, his intuition, long dormant in the fog, began to scream an alarm. Isabella's expression was that of a wounded bride, but Clara's eyes were those of someone trying to save a life. He gently pulled his hand from Isabella's and looked at the woman he planned to marry. "Isabella," he said, and his voice, though faint, held a thread of steel that hadn't been there before. "Show me the vial." Arthur's request, so simple and direct, landed like a stone in a silent pond, creating shockwaves that hit everyone in the library. Sophia gasped, her hands flying to her face, terrified by the audacity of what was happening. Clara felt a flicker of hope, a tiny flame igniting in the darkness. But it was on Isabella that the effect was most dramatic. For a split second, panic flashed in her eyes, a crack in her facade of wounded indignation. She recovered quickly, forcing a disbelieving laugh. "What? Arthur, this is absurd. You're asking me to prove my innocence against a child's fantasy. There is no vial." Her voice was loud, bordering on hysterical, a calculated performance for an audience of one. "If there isn't one, then it won't be a problem to show me the cabinet in the kitchen where you keep your tea, will it?" Arthur pressed, his voice gaining a strength that surprised everyone, including himself. The fog in his mind seemed to retreat in the face of adrenaline, replaced by a sharp clarity. He pushed himself out of the armchair, leaning heavily on the desk. The effort left him breathless, but he remained standing, authority returning to his posture. The multimillionaire who negotiated billion-dollar deals and managed a vast estate was back, albeit in a weakened body. "Let's go, all of us, to the kitchen." The walk through the corridors was the longest of Clara's life. Isabella went ahead, her shoulders rigid with rage. Arthur followed, limping slightly, trailed by a quietly weeping Sophia and Clara, who kept close to Arthur, as if her proximity could protect him. They reached the pristine kitchen. Afternoon light streamed through the windows, glinting off the stainless steel countertops. The cabinet, Isabella, Arthur said, his voice echoing in the tense silence. With a sharp, angry gesture, Isabella flung the cabinet door open. "There! Happy! Just tea leaves, like I've always said." The ceramic jar was there, just as Clara remembered. Arthur reached out and took it. He opened the lid and sniffed the aroma. Then his eyes scanned the shelf. "And Clara said it was in the back," he murmured, more to himself. He began removing the other items, a box of imported crackers, a bag of organic sugar, and then, in the dark recess of the shelf, where the vial had been, there was nothing, an empty space. Clara's heart sank. It was gone. Isabella must have moved it after she realized someone had been through her things. A smile of pure triumph spread across Isabella's face. "Well, Arthur, where is the terrible poison?" she mocked. "I told you, the girl made it all up. Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe I'm owed an apology. And you," she said, turning on Sophia, "pack your things. Your daughter just cost you your job." Sophia sobbed openly, her hand over her mouth. The defeat was total. Clara felt tears well up, hot and bitter. She had failed. She had come so close, but Isabella was too smart, always one step ahead. Arthur looked at the empty cabinet, then at Isabella's triumphant face, and finally at Clara, whose own face was a mask of devastation. He seemed to have aged 10 years in 10 minutes. He sighed, a heavy sound of resignation. "All right, Isabella," he said, his voice tired. "You're right, I apologize." He turned to Sophia. "You don't need to pack anything. You can stay. It was a misunderstanding." Isabella opened her mouth to protest, furious at being denied the eviction she craved, but Arthur held up his hand again. "The matter is closed." He turned and walked slowly out of the kitchen. His body slumped under an invisible weight. Clara's hope crumbled to dust. Arthur hadn't believed her. He just wanted to end the embarrassing scene. She had lost. Isabella gave her a look of absolute contempt before following Arthur, placing a proprietary hand on his arm. Sophia rushed to hug Clara, but the girl stood rigid, her gaze fixed on the empty cabinet. Yet, as Arthur walked away, something peculiar happened. As he passed Clara, his eyes met hers for a fleeting instant, and in the midst of all his exhaustion and apparent resignation, he gave her a wink. So fast, so subtle, she almost thought she'd imagined it, but she hadn't. It wasn't a wink of playful conspiracy like before. It was something else, a secret signal, a silent message that said, "I know. The game isn't over yet." Arthur's wink was an anchor for Clara's sinking soul. While the outside world saw a total defeat, that secret message told her otherwise. Arthur hadn't apologized because he believed Isabella. He'd apologized to end the battle so he could start the war. He was playing along, and if he was playing along, it meant that somehow he believed her. That realization changed everything. Hopelessness gave way to a cautious determination. She was no longer alone in this fight. She had the most powerful ally she could wish for, even if he had to operate from the shadows. The atmosphere in the mansion grew icy and tense. Isabella, though victorious in the kitchen, was clearly on edge. She hadn't succeeded in ousting Sophia and Clara, and the seed of doubt, however small, had been planted. She redoubled her vigilance, her eyes following Clara with a barely disguised hostility. She also intensified her care of Arthur, smothering him with an attention that was as much a display of devotion as an act of control. She rarely left him alone, monitoring his calls, his meals, and his conversations. To the rest of the household staff, she was the perfect fiancée, caring for her ailing beloved. To Clara, she was a jailer, tightening the perimeter around her prisoner. Arthur, for his part, played his role with consummate skill. He appeared weaker and more confused than ever. He accepted Isabella's infusions with resigned gratitude, complained of dizziness, and apologized for his slow mind. He allowed her to take over small decisions, like the dinner menu or responding to social emails. Isabella, believing her plan was accelerating and that Arthur's mind was finally succumbing to the substance's effect, began to let her guard down, her arrogance blinding her to what was truly happening. She didn't see the fleeting glint of clarity in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. She didn't see the way he watched her every move, every gesture, every word, filing it all away in his now sharp mind. The real game was happening far from Isabella's eyes. The night after the kitchen confrontation, Arthur, feigning a deep sleep, waited until Isabella was asleep beside him. He silently slipped out of bed and went to his study. There, he used a second laptop, one Isabella didn't know about, to begin his investigation. He was a man who had built a fortune by analyzing data, finding patterns, and exposing weaknesses in complex systems. Now, he applied that same ruthless skill to the woman he planned to marry. He began researching Isabella's past, discreetly hiring a top-tier private investigation agency via encrypted emails. He needed to know everything: her previous marriages, her finances, her associates. At the same time, he knew he needed hard proof of what was happening inside his own home. He couldn't just stop drinking the tea, that would alert Isabella. He needed to catch her in the act. But how? He was watched constantly. That's when he remembered his little guardian angel. He needed to get in touch with Clara, but it was risky. The next afternoon, while Isabella was on the phone in the garden, Arthur, who was resting on the living room sofa, saw Clara pass by in the hall. He deliberately knocked a book off the end table. When Clara instinctively rushed to pick it up, he whispered quickly, without moving his lips, "The old cell phone, bottom drawer of my desk. Get it, hide it." Before Clara could react, Isabella was back in the room, and Arthur had his eyes closed, breathing softly. Clara's heart leapt. A mission. He had given her a mission. Later, when her mother was busy in another part of the house, she tiptoed into the study. Her small hands trembled as she opened the bottom drawer of the imposing mahogany desk. There, under a pile of old papers, was an old smartphone. It was an older model, but looked functional. She hid it under her shirt and scurried back to her room. She didn't know exactly what Arthur wanted her to do with it, but the weight of the device in her hands was the weight of his trust. He wasn't just playing along, he was fighting back. And he had recruited her to be his secret soldier, his little spy. Fear was still her companion, but now it had a purpose. She had to be brave, not just for him, but with him. The old cell phone became Clara's secret talisman, a tangible link to Arthur's quiet resistance. She kept it hidden under her mattress, only taking it out at night when the mansion's silence was broken only by the distant ticking of a grandfather clock. In the dim light of her room, the screen illuminating her focused face, she taught herself how to use it. It was intuitive, and a 7-year-old's natural curiosity made her a fast learner. She found the camera, the voice recorder, the messaging app. Every icon she explored was a potential new weapon in her arsenal. Communication with Arthur was dangerous and sporadic. He used ingenious methods to pass instructions. Once, while accidentally dropping a napkin near her at dinner, a tiny folded note inside read a single word: kitchen. Another time, he pointed to a specific word in a book he was pretending to read as she passed. Record. Clara understood. Arthur wanted proof. He wanted her to use the phone to document Isabella's actions, to capture the truth that the adults refused to see. The mission was terrifying. Isabella, growing more confident in Arthur's apparent decline, was becoming more careless. She believed her only threat, the little girl, had been neutralized and silenced by her own mother. She didn't know she was being watched by keen eyes and the cold, impartial lens of a camera. Clara became an expert at hiding. The broom closet across from the kitchen became her observation post. Leaving the door cracked open just a sliver, she had a clear view of the counter where Isabella prepared her potions. Fear was a constant companion, a buzzing in her ears every time Isabella entered the kitchen. Her heart beat so loudly she was afraid the woman could hear it. With trembling hands, she would hold the phone, her finger hovering over the record button. She messed up the first few attempts, shaking so much the video was blurry or starting to record too late, but she persisted, driven by the image of Arthur's tired face. Finally, on a grey, rainy afternoon, she succeeded. Isabella walked into the kitchen, humming a soft tune, the very picture of domestic bliss. She believed Arthur was napping upstairs. Clara hit record. The old phone's camera wasn't high definition, but it was enough. The lens captured Isabella opening the cabinet, taking out the ceramic jar, and then reaching into a new, more clever hiding spot. Clara held her breath. Isabella had hidden the vial inside a bag of flour in the pantry. With a quick look over her shoulder, she took out the dark vial, uncapped it, and with a swift gesture, tipped not one, but 3 drops into the teacup. The plan was accelerating. Clara kept recording as Isabella hid the vial again and returned to the kitchen to add hot water, the steam rising and momentarily fogging the scene, as if nature itself were trying to obscure the terrible act. That night, under her blanket, Clara watched the video over and over again. It was all there, the irrefutable proof. Isabella's hand, the dark vial, the drops falling into the cup destined for Arthur. A wave of relief and terror washed over her. She had done it, but now came the hardest part, getting the evidence to Arthur without Isabella finding out. The risk was immense. If she were caught, there would be no more excuses of a child's imagination. The consequences would be swift and terrible, not just for her, but for her mother. The next day, she found her chance. Arthur, seeming particularly weak, asked Isabella to fetch a shawl from his walk-in closet at the other end of the house. While Isabella was gone, Arthur looked at Clara, who was standing near the living room doorway, and gave a slight nod toward his suit jacket, which was draped over a chair. It was the signal. Racing back to her room, Clara grabbed the phone from its hiding place and, with her heart in her throat, slipped it into the jacket's inner pocket. She barely had time to get back to her spot before Isabella returned, shawl in hand. "Here you are, my love," Isabella said, draping it over Arthur's shoulders. "You have to take care of yourself." Arthur smiled weakly at her. "What would I do without you?" he murmured. But over Isabella's shoulder, his eyes met Clara's, and in them was a glint of gratitude and promise. The time bomb had been delivered. Now, they just had to wait for the right moment to detonate it. The tension in the mansion became almost palpable, like the air pressure before a violent storm. Clara had done her part, delivering the weapon that could either free them or destroy everything. Now, the burden rested on Arthur's weakened shoulders. He had the proof, the grainy video on the old cell phone, but the knowledge was a double-edged sword. He watched it dozens of times, locked in the bathroom under the pretense of a long bath, each viewing cementing the betrayal in his heart. To see the hand of the woman he loved, the woman who shared his home and his dreams, adding poison to his drink, was an agony no physical ailment could match. The fog in his mind had lifted completely, replaced by an icy clarity and a deep, quiet rage. He knew he couldn't just confront Isabella. She was cunning and would lie, maybe even try to destroy the phone. He needed more. He needed to understand the scope of her plan. The private investigation agency he'd hired began sending its reports, and what they uncovered was darker than he could have imagined. Isabella, whose real name was Helena, had a history. 2 previous husbands, both wealthy and significantly older, had died of natural causes after short illnesses that left them confused and dependent. In both cases, Helena had inherited a considerable fortune. She was a professional, a predator who moved silently through the circles of the wealthy, preying on vulnerable men. The discovery that he was not the first, but merely the latest in a line of victims, filled him with a mixture of horror and humiliation. He, Arthur, the shrewd billionaire tycoon who built an empire from scratch, who prided himself on his ability to judge character, had been played so completely. His capital, his stocks, his assets, they were all just a target for her. The knowledge forced him to refine his performance. Faking his weakness became a Herculean effort when all he wanted to do was scream and expose the lie. He needed time to set his trap, to ensure that when he moved, she would have no escape. But Isabella, feeling her control over Arthur was nearly complete, grew bolder. She began bringing him documents to sign, power of attorney, asset transfers, changes to his will. It's just to make things easier. "My love," she would say, her voice soft as silk, "this way I can manage your business affairs while you recover. You won't have to worry about a thing." He would sign, knowing his signature was shaky and weak, which only encouraged her further. What she didn't know was that hours earlier he had contacted his most trusted lawyer, preemptively invalidating any documents signed during his illness and giving him precise instructions. Meanwhile, the dynamic between Clara and her mother reached a new level of strain. Sophia, oblivious to the secret drama unfolding, only saw her daughter behaving strangely and Arthur growing sicker. She lived in a constant state of anxiety, dreading the day Isabella's patience would finally run out. One evening, she found Clara awake, sitting by the window. "What are you doing, child? You don't sleep properly anymore." "Just looking at the stars," Clara lied. Sophia sighed, sitting beside her. "I know things are difficult, but you need to stop worrying about things you don't understand. Promise me, Clara, promise me you'll behave and stay out of trouble." Clara looked at her mother's tired, worried face and felt a wave of sorrow. She was protecting her mother too, but Sophia couldn't know that. "I promise, Mom," she whispered. It was a promise she knew she might not be able to keep. The breaking point was approaching. Isabella, believing Arthur's fortune was within her grasp, set a date for a small wedding ceremony at the mansion in just 1 week. "It will be intimate, just us and a judge," she told Arthur. "We can't wait any longer to be husband and wife." To Arthur, it sounded like a sentence. His time was running out. He had to act, and fast. The next dinner would be crucial. He sent a coded message to his lawyer and his head of personal security. The trap was set. He only hoped he had the strength to see it through, and that his brave little ally would be safe when the storm finally broke. He gave Clara a quick, meaningful look during lunch. The girl, with an intuition far beyond her years, understood. The time was coming. The night fell on the mansion like a heavy shroud, bringing with it a deceptive quiet, like the calm in the eye of a hurricane. In the dining room, the table was set for 2, the finest china and sterling silver gleaming in the soft candlelight. It was meant to be a celebratory dinner, a toast to their impending marriage. For Arthur, it was the final stage of a dangerous play. He felt like an actor on opening night, every nerve on edge, but his face showed only the familiar exhaustion he had been perfecting for weeks. Isabella was radiant, wearing a red dress that contrasted with Arthur's calculated pallor. She was at the peak of her triumph, the fortune she coveted just days away. She served the dinner herself, having sent the cook home early, and as the final act of her ritual, she went to the kitchen to prepare the tea. "Just a cup to help you sleep well, my love," she said, her voice full of poisonous solicitude. Hidden in her observation post in the broom closet, Clara watched, her heart thudding. She didn't need the phone anymore. Her presence was an act of silent solidarity, a vigil for Arthur. She saw Isabella perform the same dark ritual, but this time, with reckless confidence, she added an even larger dose of the substance to the teapot, enough to ensure Arthur would be completely incapacitated and pliable for the events of the next few days. When Isabella returned to the dining room, the silver tray in her hands, she found Arthur staring into the fireplace, his face pensive. "Here you are, darling," she said, placing the steaming cup before him. He turned, looking at the cup and then at her, his eyes, for the first time in weeks, completely clear, with no trace of the confused haze she had grown accustomed to. "You know, Isabella," he began, his voice calm and level, "I was thinking about my father. He always told me to be careful who I trusted with my estate. He said greed can wear the prettiest face." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Isabella's face. "Arthur, darling, you're rambling. Drink your tea." She nudged the cup subtly toward him. He didn't touch it. Instead, he looked directly into her eyes. "I trusted you," he said, and the pain in his voice was real, a deep wound that would never fully heal. "I gave you my heart, my home. I was ready to give you my name, and all this time, you were killing me, slowly." The blood drained from Isabella's face. The accusation, so direct and unexpected, stunned her into silence. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, panic beginning to rise. "Of course you do," Arthur continued, his voice gaining a steely edge. "You know about this tea. You know about the vial you hid in the flour. You know about my 2 predecessors, the husbands who had the misfortune of getting sick and dying so conveniently." Each word was a hammer blow. Isabella shrank back, her eyes wide with the horror not of guilt, but of exposure. "It's that girl, that lying little pest. She's poisoned your mind against me." "No," Arthur said, rising slowly from his chair, his posture no longer that of a sick man, but of a judge. "She opened my eyes. She had the courage that none of the adults around me did. She risked everything to save me, while you risked everything to destroy me." It was at that moment that the dining room doors swung open. It wasn't the cook or Sophia. It was 2 men in dark suits. Arthur's security team, accompanied by a man Clara recognized as Arthur's lawyer. "Helena," the lawyer said, using her real name, "I believe you'll find these documents you had Mr. Arthur sign will not hold up in court. And as for your other activities, we have proof." The reality of it all crashed down on Isabella. The trap had sprung. Her eyes flashed with fury and desperation. In a final act of defiance, she snatched the steak knife from the table. "Stay away from me!" she shrieked, brandishing the blade. The security men started forward, but Arthur held up a hand. "That won't be necessary." He picked up the teacup. "If I'm wrong, Isabella, if this is just a harmless herbal tea, you drink it." He held the cup out to her, the dark, steaming liquid hovering in the air between them. It was checkmate. The final confrontation would not be one of force, but of truth. Her entire scheme, all her greed, was contained in that one small porcelain cup. The choice was hers: admit defeat or drink her own poison. Arthur's ultimatum hung in the air, sharper than the knife in Isabella's trembling hands. Her eyes darted frantically from the cup to Arthur's impassive face, to the men standing in the doorway, and finally to the knife in her hand. The dining room, once the stage for her imminent triumph, had become her cage. The scent of the tea, for months her secret weapon, now seemed to suffocate her. She knew she was cornered. The knife was useless. Her true power had never been in physical violence, but in quiet manipulation, in betrayal disguised as care. And that weapon had been stripped from her. With a cry of rage and frustration, she threw the knife onto the table, where it clattered with a metallic finality that echoed in the tense silence. She did not touch the cup. Her refusal was a confession more eloquent than any words. The mask of the devoted fiancé disintegrated completely, revealing the naked face of a bitter, defeated woman. "You'll never prove anything," she spat, the venom now only in her words. "You've entrapped me." Arthur's lawyer stepped forward, holding a folder. "Actually, Helena, we have everything. We have the video that young Clara so bravely recorded. We have the private investigators, reports detailing your past activities, and..." Most importantly, he said with a slight smile, we have samples of the tea that Mr. Arthur has been secretly saving for over a week. They have already been sent for lab analysis. The final revelation struck her. She hadn't just been discovered. She had been methodically outplayed. Arthur, the man she had deemed a weak, pliable victim, had been playing her, feigning his decline while building an ironclad case against her. The security guards moved in and, without resistance, escorted her from the room. As she passed Arthur, she shot him a look of pure hatred. "You'll regret this," she hissed. Arthur just watched her go, a deep sadness in his eyes. "I already do," he whispered to the empty room. "I regret being so blind." As soon as the doors closed, the strength that had been holding Arthur up seemed to desert him. He sank heavily into his chair, his body trembling with adrenaline and emotional exhaustion. The victory was his, but the cost was immense. The betrayal had left deep scars. It was a small sound that broke him from his thoughts. Clara stepped out from her hiding place, her wide eyes fixed on him, full of concern. She approached slowly, as if unsure it was safe. He opened his arms, and she ran into them. He held her tight, burying his face in her hair. "You saved me, Clara," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You are the bravest person I have ever known." Just then, Sophia rushed into the room, her face pale with fright, having been alerted by the commotion. She saw the overturned table, the lawyer, and her daughter in the arms of a visibly shaken Arthur. "Mr. Arthur, what happened?" The lawyer briefly explained the situation, the terrible truth about Isabella. Sophia listened, her jaw slack, horror and guilt warring on her face. She looked at her daughter, the girl she had scolded and silenced, the girl whose desperate warnings she had dismissed as fantasy. Tears streamed down her face as she finally understood the scale of Clara's courage and her own blindness. "Oh, my child," she sobbed, sinking to her knees. "Forgive me, I didn't believe you." Clara wriggled out of Arthur's embrace and ran to her mother, hugging her tightly. "It's okay, Mom. You were just scared." Arthur watched them, mother and daughter clinging to each other, and felt something shift inside him. The wound of betrayal was still there, but it was being filled by a wave of warmth and gratitude. The wealth, the businesses, the immense fortune, none of it mattered in that moment. What mattered was right here, in this room, the fierce loyalty of a little girl and the repentant love of her mother. He had been deceived by the family he had chosen, but fate had brought him the family he truly needed, disguised as a housekeeper and her small, extraordinary daughter. The battle was over. Now, the long road to healing could begin. 4 weeks had passed since that dramatic night in the dining room. The mansion, once a stage for deceit and fear, gradually rediscovered its peace. The toxic presence of Isabella, or rather Helena, was gone, leaving behind only the echo of a bitter memory. News of her arrest and the investigations into her past became a hushed topic in financial circles. But within the walls of this house, the focus was entirely on the future. Arthur's recovery was remarkable. Free from the substance that had clouded his mind and weakened his body, he regained his vitality. With the help of the best doctors who confirmed the presence of a slow-acting toxin in his system, he detoxified and grew stronger, the clarity in his eyes and the firmness in his step returning each day. But the deepest transformation was not physical. The experience had changed him in ways no stock trade or business acquisition ever could. He realized the fragility of trust and the true value of loyalty. His vast fortune, his assets, his dividends, it all felt hollow compared to the genuine love and protection he had received from a 7-year-old child. He looked at Clara no longer as his housekeeper's daughter, but as his savior, his protector, the light that had guided him out of the darkness. One evening, exactly 1 month after the confrontation, Arthur, Clara, and Sophia sat at the same dining table, But the atmosphere could not have been more different. There was no fine china or sterling silver. Instead, they were eating Sophia's home cooking from simple plates. Laughter filled the air, replacing the tense whispers of before. During dinner, Arthur set down his silverware and looked at Sophia with a gentle seriousness. "Sophia," he began, "what you and Clara did for me, there's no money, no capital, not all the gold in the world that could repay it. I've realized I spent my entire life building an empire, but I neglected to build a home." He then turned to Clara, his eyes shining with emotion. "And you, my little warrior, you taught me what family means. A family isn't made of blood ties, but of bonds of love and trust." He took Sophia's hand. "I want you both to stay, not as my employee and her daughter, but as my family. Sophia, I'd like to offer you an administrative position at one of my charitable foundations. You are a smart, hard-working woman, and your compassion would be an invaluable asset. And Clara," he paused, his voice thick, "I'd like to ask if you would both give me the honor of legally becoming her father. I want to adopt her." Tears streamed down Sophia's face, this time tears of pure joy and gratitude. Clara, with the simple wisdom of a child who knows what is true, did not hesitate. She got up from her chair, ran to Arthur and hugged him with all her might. "Yes," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. "Yes." The mansion that had witnessed months of silent poisoning was transformed into the warm home where a true family blossomed. The tycoon, who nearly lost everything by trusting the wrong person, learned that sometimes the greatest treasures come disguised as small, guardian angels. The little girl, who risked absolutely everything to save someone she loved, discovered that true courage knows no age when it comes to protecting who truly matters. And the mother, who learned a hard lesson about faith and perception, found the security and dignity she had always dreamed of for her daughter. Together, the three of them proved that the strongest families are not those bound by inheritance or convenience, but those built brick by brick with genuine love, mutual trust, and the courage to fight for the truth, no matter how terrifying it may be. Love, in the end, would always be the best investment.